All right, we're going to be talking about communication partner skills, which are absolutely essential if we want our students to be able to communicate better at school, at home, and in life. So let's get started here within your workbook. Go ahead and open up to that page and let's brainstorm who are communication partners. They are actually anyone who interacts with an AAC user or an individual with complex communication needs. So take some time to think about who are the staff that are communication partners that really need to be educated and involved in this process. Chances are they're going to include teachers, instructional support, educational assistants, custodians, anyone in the front office, principals. Think of all the people that need to be on board for this child to be able to communicate well and have a really supportive team, and write them down. Then you're going to go through and you're going to write down the different students that they interact with. Now, I know this may be a huge list depending on what the environment is for your student, but just like a speaking student, someone who's primarily relies on verbal speech can say the name of anyone in their environment, your student needs to be able to communicate and say the name of anyone that they interact with as well. Here are some things that we need to make sure that all communication partners understand. These are just kind of the basics. So some things that we should do is keep a working AAC system within 2 feet of the student at all times, or as much as possible. Now, so you might be thinking, but that is not a very water resistant system. Well, that's okay, right? Because that's why all our AAC users are going to have some kind of backup or something that they can use in other environments. Something that we don't ever want to do is we don't want to take away AAC because of behavior. If a student is using their AAC in a way that you feel like they're just trying to get attention, or maybe they're just stimming on the device, then you need to work with a behavior specialist and figure out what's going on and why, and how can we enable this child to still be able to communicate in a proper way. Just like our little ones, when they're learning language, sometimes their language is not exactly what we want it to be, right? But we have to learn to shape that and use other techniques to try to allow them to continue to communicate, but maybe shape how they communicate in that way. Another thing that we do want to do is we always want to be modeling what we're saying. And what this looks like is being able to point to words on their AAC system as you're talking. Now, it might just be like one word depending on the current abilities of the student. But I could say something like, hey, Johnny, we're going to go to music next. Are you excited? Right? So in that case, I was only modeling one word, but I was showing them that their AAC system is valid and important. And in case they weren't already aware where the word go was, I was teaching them where it was as well. Some things that we should not do is we should not just hand someone a system and then say, okay, learn it on your own, right? Because again, remember, assume that your child maybe doesn't have the literacy skills to read all these little words. If you got handed the same thing and you couldn't read the little words here and you just had all these little stick figures, you wouldn't know what the heck was going on either. Individuals need to be taught this as a language system the same way that you need to be taught when you're learning a second language. Like if you wanted to go out, you were going to go on vacation somewhere and you wanted to learn some of that language, you would need some direct instruction to help you out. Well, our AAC users need that as well. Okay, some more things that you should do is ask open-ended questions in which you really want to hear what the AAC user has to say. So examples of that are, where do you want to go next? A non-example would be something that I already know the answer to. So for example, I might be saying, what color is it? What color is it? Oh, it's blue, right? So in that case, I'm not having a meaningful interaction with my AAC user. I'm not showing them that communication is fun and functional. I'm just showing them that I can use communication to test them. And who wants to be tested all day long? Another thing that communication partners should do is assume that the student has something interesting to say. Now, there's lots of different ways that we can do this. One way is if the child points anywhere on the system, we say, oh, wow, it looks like you're pointing towards help. You must need some help. And we're just assuming meaning the same way we do when a little baby is learning to talk and goes, ma, 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 ma. And you're like, oh, you must be saying mama, even though chances are they're just babbling. The same is true also for behaviors, right? So if a child looks at something, give them some words and model it on their system as well. They look at something, you're like, oh, it looks like you want to go over there. Great, let's go do it. So they can be using their system, or they can be using any gestures, facial expressions, anything like that. Give them the words, model it on their system. Now, what we don't want to do is assume that our student has nothing to say. Our students have lots of things that they want to say, lots of things that they're thinking about. Our job is to try to help them communicate that to the rest of the world. Something that we should do is promote independent use of AAC. That means that we need to know that this student has something valuable to say, and we don't always know what it is, right? So we are not going to be taking our student's hand and pointing for them. We are not going to be doing hand over hand to be like, oh, I think this is what you want to say. This is what you want to say. Because that's not going to lead to an independent communicator when they're out of school at age 18 to 21. We want to provide them with models. We could show them and say, oh, maybe you're trying to say this, or I wonder if you're trying to say put. But we're not going to speak for them unless we 100% know what they're trying to say. And then even then, we're still going to just be modeling it. Something that we don't want to do is show or tell the student exactly what to do at all times. Something that we do want to do is make communication fun and engaging. We want to have fun interactions with our students so that they know that communication is not only powerful, but it's a wonderful way to form social relationships. But we don't want to make communication a chore or an exercise or just a quizzing thing. If the only thing you're using your communication for is for the child to answer questions that you already know the answer to, that's not fun. The child probably is just going to reject the whole system because why? Like, there's no point in their mind. Another thing, the last thing on this list that we want to make sure that we are always doing for our AAC users is if they have a high-tech AAC system, we want to make sure that it is always charged. So hopefully, if the child owns this device, hopefully it's being charged every night at home. But you know, things happen. Sometimes that doesn't work out. So we want to come up with a system, a time of day, a location, an extra charger if needed to make sure it's always charged. And while the device is being charged, we want to have a backup system. We don't ever want our kids to be without some kind of language system. What we don't want to do is let it run out of charge and then stick it back in the backpack, no backpacks, and not provide anything else for them. So these are really important communication partner skills that you can share with everyone on the list that you just went through that is going to be interacting and having a relationship with this student. Okay, here are my four things that all communication partners need to do. And I have developed the acronym WISE. Here they go. You ready? W is for wait. We want to make sure that we, as communication partners, are giving at least 5 to 10 seconds of expectant pausing waiting for our student to communicate. This allows them extra time to process what you said and process a response. Many of our students need more than 5 to 10 seconds, and you need to know, that kid actually needs 10 to 20 seconds. It makes such a huge difference in our students' ability to communicate when we give them that extra time to really think about their response. The next thing we want to do is I for invite. We want to invite communication without requiring it. Instead of saying, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? We could be, hey, I wonder if, and make it an invitation. Make it something that they're invited to do without actually going and saying exactly what they're supposed to say. Next is S, and this one is for show, which is just how I got my modeling in here. We need to be able to speak AAC if we want our children to be able to speak AAC, right? We have to provide them with direct instruction by showing them the words that we are saying so that they have both a visual and auditory support for learning the language system. For some students, that's going to look like pointing to one word. For some students, it might look like pointing to multiple words. It just depends on your student and where they're currently at. And then finally, and this goes into that, it's E for expand. If your student is currently not using hardly any single words, then we want to expand by giving them one word, right? That's a huge improvement over none. But if your student is using one word, then that's when we can expand by using 2 or maybe even 3 words. So we always want to go a little bit further than where that student currently is at. Another way to think about expand is to give them alternate vocabulary, right? So if they said that, something is pink, you could be like, yeah, it is pink. But you know what? It's also purple. It is a lot of colors, right? So I just added a few extra words onto that to help develop that skill. Vygotsky calls this, in his educational theory, he calls this the zone of proximal development. We take where the student currently is and we add just a little bit more support to help lead them on to the next step. Okay, so here's what you're going to do in your workbook. You are going to go through and you're going to write down what will wait look like for you with your students. So write down a couple bullet points. You could write down one particular student is going to need X amount of time. You could write down some other student needs a different amount of time. You could write down what you're going to be doing while you're waiting. Maybe you're counting 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, whatever it is you need to do. Then we're going to practice with our inviting. What is it going to sound like and look like when you invite your AAC user to participate in the conversation? Write down some phrases that you can use and then practice saying them. I wonder if, or what do you think about? Those would be some examples of ways that you can invite your AAC user. Show. Okay, guys, showing is going to be key here. And how do you show? Well, you got to practice yourself. So see if you can get hold of, at the very least, a paper-based system that looks like your student and practice finding and showing the words. Write down a few phrases in your book that you can practice finding at least one word for. And you might want to look at your communication system first before you decide on which phrases you're going to be using. And finally, expand. Write down some ideas. How are you going to expand what your student is saying? So you could write down here, if my student communicates with me, go, then I can communicate back, go. I'm going to go to places. Go to the door. Right, so I can just practice that because the more you practice, right, the better you get, the more of a habit it is. What I want you to do now is, this is the end of this slideshow, so I'm going to have you find a partner or multiple partners and go through and role play each of these steps. We know that adults learn through role play, right? So you need to practice these steps. Try it out with your colleagues, try it out with your loved ones at home. Practice being a really wise communicator so that you are ready to go and able to be a fabulous communication partner with your AAC user.